Welcome to Soul-Led Creative Women, the podcast for heart-centered creative women who are ready to reclaim their spark and live with deeper meaning, authenticity, and soul. So today I have Tina Bernstein with me. Tina is a designer and creative entrepreneur, also known as cartographer of emotions. She founded Mapology Guides, which are illustrated self-help maps for life's ever-evolving journey. With her long-standing background in psychology and having suffered from addictions and mental illness herself, Mapology Guides arose from her desire to give back and passion to find different ways to empower individuals to adopt their own approach to mindfulness, well-being, and personal development. So welcome, Tina.
Thank you so much for having me. Hello.
So today we're going to be talking all about your Mapology Guides and your work as a self-proclaimed cartographer of emotions. I love that term. That's amazing. So let's jump straight in and start with your journey. Tell us about how you've ended up here and what's led you to create these Mapology Guides.
Wow. How long have you got? It actually took me a long time to come up with the
Hmm.
idea for Mapology Guides. People think sometimes that, you're having an aha moment, you are someone. But I think it's to do with very, very long-term reading, thinking, knowing
Mm.
what you're about, knowing what you want to do, maybe looking at your meaning and purpose, and that was the case for me. I dabbled in a lot of things before I started
Mm.
Mapology Guides because I couldn't settle on anything that I knew I wanted to take forward
Hmm.
um, for the long term. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So I did study graphic design in
Hmm.
the 80s.
Hmm.
Uh, but I wasn't really very artistic or creative, or at least I didn't know. But I went to a boarding
Sure.
school and there was an art school, and the teacher there saw something in me that I didn't see, obviously. And he guided me. And that was probably one of the most extraordinary events in my life.
Hmm.
And so I found myself in art college, not really knowing what I was doing, but I sort of managed to scrape through everything. But I do believe that art and creativity is something that everyone has.
Hmm.
And in fact, the latest Mapology Guides, which is geared more towards businesses or organizations or
Hmm.
freelancers,
Hmm.
is about creative thinking in the workplace.
Okay.
And there's a whole section where we talk about that everybody is born creative. We are all born
Mm.
creative. If we look at children, I
Mm.
mean, they're just amazing, aren't they, what they do?
Mm.
Starting from crayons to building things to their imagination. And then we get to school and
Mm.
things change. And so we have a section in that map that is, we call it, the I'm not creative brigade. Because what happens
Sure.
in adulthood is you say to somebody, do you think, do you feel creative or do you think you're creative? And they go, no, I can't draw. So
Yeah.
everybody associates creativity with drawing. To be honest, I'm not a great drawer. I admit it on the podcast. It has nothing to do with an ability to draw.
No.
It has to do with an ability to be. And I say to people, if you've got dressed this morning and if you've found what you want to eat for breakfast, then you are creative by nature.
Yeah, absolutely. So, just to be clear, then, just so that people know what we're talking about, can you give us, an overview of the formula or the recipe, if you like, for your Mapology guides and what the finished product looks like? Tell us a bit about them.
Yes, so basically, I came up with an idea where I call them maps. Some people call them guides. And the reason for the term maps is because I found that maps don't always have to be geographical. Of course, they mostly are, we know. But to me, it was the idea of going from A to B.
Hmm.
If I can get somebody to go from A to B with a map, then I feel I've achieved everything I've set out to achieve. Because, I cannot change somebody's entire life with an A2 sheet of paper
No.
that is fully illustrated. But some people do have or do get an insight, they get some self-awareness
Mm.
and then they're on the journey. So it's more about awakening rather than
Seed planting.
It's seed planting. That's a very good way of putting it. And it depends at what stage you get to a Mapology guide. But so it took quite a long time to understand how to do them.
Yeah,
Because if
sure.
I said to any illustrator or anyone, can we do a map on overthinking? They look blank at you. It is quite complex. But the way
Mm,
we do it is we have a whole day of brainstorming. I decide on a theme. I invite a team, which consists of an illustrator and a creative writer. And we literally unpack the theme, which are normally quite complex. If you think about saying no, that
mm,
people write books about it. So we unpack it and then repackage it in the Mapology Guides way of doing things, where we use metaphors.
mm.
So I can give you an example if I can,
Yeah,
this is
yeah, go,
what Zoom is good for. This
go
is
for
the
it.
latest stuff. This is creative thinking in the workplace and how to drive innovation at work.
Yeah,
It was based a little bit on Wallace and Gromit. I don't know whether your listeners in Australia or America know about it. It's sort of an English animation
I know
project.
about it, so
So they're fully
hopefully they do.
illustrated. Sorry?
I said I know about it, so hopefully they do.
Oh, okay, okay. But it's fully illustrated and it's like a bit like a machine, and you go through it. And so we use
Mm,
metaphors to sort of help people understand what we're talking about in an easier way.
yeah,
And so
okay.
the reason why I do this is because I'm a designer. I studied graphic design at St. Martin's College in London. And when I went to therapy, I had long-term therapy starting from 26.
Hmm.
Um, I kind of felt there was no color in anything. It was all books or black and white
Mm.
photocopies or, lots of words. And
Information
as a
overload.
designer, it is a little bit, but
Mm.
also some of us are visual learners, especially for neurodiversity. They would find it more challenging to read a book of 400 pages on
Yeah.
how to say no. So I wanted to combine the two. And that is why I came up with my Mapology Guide.
Mm.
I love maps. I love the idea of self-development and traveling from where you are now to where you want to go. And that is how I came up with the product. I'll be honest, my vision is to be the Ladybird books of the 21st century, because I think
Hmm.
they're little entities that you can keep on a desk, in a drawer, take with you for
Sure.
lunch, read anywhere. So, I wanted a tool that people could use
Mm.
and sort of discover something new.
That's a great aspiration. That's like, shifting culture, you know? Yeah, that's really powerful. It's a great thing to be aiming for. I love that. So if there was one thing that you would love, for an individual person to take away from one of your guides, what would that be?
Self-awareness and self-knowledge, that they've learned
Okay.
something new. We've got a map on anger. Now, the reason I wanted to do this map is because a lot of women think, well, anger doesn't belong to women. It's a male
Mm.
thing, right? And that isn't quite true, as we know. It is beautifully illustrated, very, very strong colors. And on there are lots of little things like hungry, women sometimes when they haven't eaten for a while can have low blood sugar levels and start sort of reacting in a
Yep.
way that sometimes isn't what they want. And sometimes they don't know about that, right? They don't know
Mm.
that if they had a little bit of nuts or a date or an apple, that would subside.
Mm.
So I want people to see themselves in a map. There's always loads and loads of information where I'm hoping that somebody will go, oh my God, that's me.
Mm.
That's what I do. And then they're on the journey. Because you've
Mm.
got to get people to see themselves in something.
Mm.
Because not everybody can go to therapy. I'm a huge fan of psychotherapy. It has changed and saved my life. But these days, people don't go so much in long-term therapy for all sorts of reasons. They want something that's a bit quicker. So, yeah, if somebody can walk away and have learn something new about themselves,
Mm.
then that is really what I think these maps are for, because you can then go on a longer journey.
Mm. It almost changes the accessibility as well, because like you said, some people are visual learners. So obviously the art and the illustration and the color piece is huge. But what do you hope these guides capture that's missing from standard diagrams or resource guides?
Creativity.
Yeah, okay.
I mean, I think infographics are fantastic. I mean,
Okay.
again, I've taken from everywhere, I think, subconsciously. In my
Mm,
learning, I've always been curious. I have a whole library at home. I've always, read books and done everything. I think when I came up with my Mapology Guide, it was very much a combination of many things, one of them
mm,
being mind maps, from Tony
okay.
Bizan. So I love infographics. I think they're fantastic
Yeah.
and they're really to the point. But I think infographics and self-help is slightly different because infographics are more factual, aren't they? They're
Yeah,
linear,
sure.
whereby some of my apology guides are non-linear. So
Yeah,
that
that's what I
makes
was going
it
to say
more
before. It's a non-linear approach. It's like what it does for people as well. This is what I'm taking from it as you're speaking is that it makes people realize there's more than one way of being, of doing, of responding, of being triggered. There's more than one way, and that's kind of mind-blowing in itself potentially for people. So that's really cool.
Well, I think also that's why we have so many books on similar subjects, because you
Yeah,
and I might like a different way of writing style. So one book will speak to you, whereby another book will speak to me, and the
mm,
topics can be similar. But in terms of self-help and visual, I think that for me was lacking, that
yeah,
I think we put a lot of fun into our maps. They're
yeah,
serious by nature, and on the anger map, it does say if you have a lot of anger issues, we recommend anger management or therapy or
yeah,
talking to somebody
yeah,
in the field. But they also, I just wanted to alleviate this sense of, oh, I've got some mental health issues or illness. We all have mental health issues, not illnesses, obviously, but we all have somewhere some mental health issues. And I wanted to make it okay. It is
mm,
okay, and we can laugh about it and we can talk about it. And so the maps are very much people do them on their own. You can do them with friends. A lot of coaches and therapists use them as conversation starters and
yeah,
icebreakers.
yeah,
So sometimes when we're talking about creativity, let's say somebody maybe doesn't speak English and they're in English, you could say, how do you feel about the color or about this particular illustration? And off you go
yeah,
into some subject. So I think they've got a lot of purpose and a lot of ways.
yeah,
As you said, there's many ways to skin an onion, and you can use them in a linear way, obviously just reading them and making notes, whatever. You can use them by just dipping in,
mm,
or you can use them by taking one particular piece and then doing something else and then revisiting later on. It's interesting when people revisit the maps a year or two later on and sort of see where they were when they started
sure.
with Mapology Guide and where they're now. So there's many, many ways, but creativity is key.
Mm,
And I don't often talk about this, but for me, it isn't just about giving back in terms of self-help and self-knowledge and self-awareness, which I'm very passionate about.
yeah,
I'm very passionate about people getting to know themselves and understanding themselves. But I'm equally passionate about creativity. So
mm,
I try to combine the two. And I'm not sure everybody gets that from a Mapology Guide, if that makes sense.
yeah,
But for me, I think if you can think creatively, you can solve many problems in your life.
yeah, absolutely. That was kind of going to be my next question, in terms of the art and the illustration side, because there's two sides to this, right? There's the visual aspect, creative aspect of them, and then there's this kind of creative interpretation piece. So in terms of the visual aspect, the art and the color and all those things, how important do you think that piece is to making these guides work?
I think it's everything
Yeah,
because, how do you illustrate how to say no? It's abstract, isn't it? I mean, how do you do it?
yeah,
So we came up with a greenhouse and the idea of seed to plant. And so saying no is very nuanced. The way you will say no to me is probably quite different to how you would say it to a family member or
sure.
somebody you've known
A
all your life,
child.
right?
Mm.
So it's very, very nuanced.
Yep.
And it takes a bit of time and a bit of understanding. And so the metaphor of a greenhouse with plants from seed to full plant, for instance, the cactus we have on the illustration is the hard no. So you see, all of a sudden, you are helping people to make
Mm,
associations.
mm,
And once that, because self-help is such an abstract concept, if I say to you, do you know yourself? It's very abstract, right? So
mm,
we're trying to help people with association and metaphors to understand the
mm,
concept and understand what we're saying,
mm.
as well as words, by the way.
Yeah,
They're
yeah, sure.
heavily illustrated, but there's also words,
Yes. Lots of
obviously.
words. You still got lots of words on there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Not as much as in a book,
Yeah, yeah,
obviously.
yeah, sure, sure,
And
sure,
so
sure.
we need
It's
to we need
on
to
a page.
curate.
Mm.
Yes. And because it's an A2 sheet of paper,
Yeah.
folded,
Yeah.
double-sided,
Yeah.
we need to curate heavily because
Yes.
the subject of saying no, or the subject
Yes.
of overthinking, or the subject of we've got a map called The Expedition Towards a Meaningful Life. I
Yeah.
mean, people write tomes about
Yeah,
things
yeah,
like
yeah.
that.
You've only
We
got a limited
distill it
space.
all into, an
Yeah.
A2 sheet of paper, really.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. Yeah, really cool. So tell us then about your thoughts in terms of the power of creativity. Why is creativity so powerful when people are struggling with life challenges? Because ultimately you're trying to help people through challenge, right? So tell us about why creativity is so powerful in your mind.
I'm really into creative thinking. I think I've always been. In fact, when I went from foundation to BA graphic design, I actually I applied to Central School of Art and Design. They had a library, and the colleges amalgamated, and I ended up in St. Martin's, which was a very hip art school. And but what it didn't have was a library, and what it didn't have is time to come up with concepts. And so I struggled a little bit because I like coming up with a concept. I think even back then, and sort of finding metaphors and ways to explain things. I think
Yeah.
creativity and creative thinking are really powerful in terms of healing. So if you're
Mm-hmm.
healing
Mm-hmm.
trauma or anything, if you are, for instance, I have some chronic illness issues, so I eat in a certain way, but because I think creatively, it makes it all so much easier. It makes it easier to think
Mm.
about the shopping, the cooking, the eating, the taking with me when I'm away. All those things I call creative thinking because you're thinking about a problem in a creative way. And often that isn't black and white. And I think
Mm-hmm.
people often think, they'll ask a question and they want a black and white answer.
Yeah, sure.
And there's a lot of gray out there. So I think to train yourself to maybe go through some creative thinking exercises or something will open up a whole
Mm.
world to some people. And to be honest, I've been reading those books forever, so of course it's now innate in me, of course. But if I can say to people, just get a book about creative thinking or how to resolve a problem in a creative way, because we all learn, everything I show in the maps. Obviously, I've learned in like 20 years of psychotherapy and everything else, but we're not born with all of this. I do think we need to learn those skills.
Mm.
And if we don't learn those skills, then we can be left behind.
Sure.
Having said all that, we also now have AI. So we have more of a reason to adapt creatively because that's something that AI would find difficult to be me, to be
Yeah.
entirely me. That's still a problem for AI. I hope that's never going to be resolved, but So yeah, I do think creative thinking or creativity can help people throughout their lives in so many, whether it's relationships, whether it's parenthood, whether it's jobs, whether anything, it just helps a
Yeah.
lot. And it's also fun, if I
Yeah.
may say so. It's
Yeah.
fun to work something out, to think about it differently. But I
Yeah.
do feel it's a skill. Although I've said before, we're all creative, that needs to be honed. We can't just say,
Yes.
well, as a child, I had crayons and I was creative, and now I'm not any longer. It has to be honed.
Yes. And part of that is just showing up for it and being brave enough to show up for it because I think, people struggle with that a bit because there's vulnerability in it, and it can be really uncomfortable when you aren't a master. No one's a master when they start, though, right? So that's
But I
part
don't
of the
think I'm a
journey.
master. I think I'm far from being
Yeah.
a master in it. However, I do have enough tools. But I'll give one explanation. At 26, I had a very major nervous breakdown that really brought my life to a
Hmm.
standstill. And that's when I sought out psychotherapy. But I remember coming back from my first session and sort of thinking, okay, I can't work. I've got claustrophobia, agoraphobia, I have panic attacks. I'm
Mm.
sort of lost my, very high powered job and all those things. So, what am I going to do? And I thought, well, I'm going to make myself the project. And I sort of started mind mapping, I suppose. This is what I mean. Mapology Guides was sort of
Yeah.
accumulation of many years of doing things, but I
Yeah.
started mind mapping about, so what do I do? I knew nothing about panic attacks. It was pre-internet. You couldn't just Google,
Mm, mm,
I
mm.
had to go to the library. And I did this diagram and I remember where I thought, I must go and get some massages because that's sort of healing, and it was also it was non-sexual healing. So I think that was quite important at that time for me
Yeah.
personally. But also I wanted to look at food. I had an eating disorder, I realized in therapy. So I wanted to teach myself about food. I knew nothing about food, like absolute nothing. And as I said, there wasn't the internet, so it was much harder. But I think that's a positive thing because I had to
Yeah.
literally work things out
Figure it out.
rather than just Google and get 1,000 pages, which is amazing itself. But I made myself the project, and I think there was a creative way. I didn't realize it then, but that was
Yes.
a creative way.
Yeah. Yeah. You went on a journey with it, and yeah, you figured it out. So it's pretty cool. So, I mean, I believe that there is that this our spiritual and our creative journeys are intrinsically linked. Do you believe that creativity has the power to connect us with something bigger than ourselves?
100%.
Mm.
I mean, well, first of all, I mean, not everyone believes, I suppose, in spirituality. I'm not religious. I'm more
Yeah.
spiritual than
Yeah.
than religious. But I think when things happen, sometimes there's some magic that happen, and you think, how did that happen? How did that happen? I mean, I believe that it happens because it's like writers. The writers talk about, or some writers talk about, I sit on my desk from 9 to 5 every day, and I wait for the muse to visit me, right? So what that's saying is be consistent. Don't just sort of turn up once a month and expect, you know, a Tolstoy sort of
Magic.
tome or something. Yes. So there's definitely practical things to it all. But
Mm.
I think when they coincide, sometimes I think we get rewarded, and
Mm.
I see that in a spiritual way. I
Yeah.
think it's something about showing up
Mm.
that helps. Yeah, I just think, spirituality wise, sometimes I've reached out to angels. Some people might find that strange who know me. But actually, when I was really in quite despair, and so the trick there is to talk out loud. So don't
Okay.
internalize it, but ask for help
Sure.
out loud.
I talk to myself all the time.
And every single time it has helped.
Okay.
So there's loads of things that I think we don't know about that are out there,
Yeah.
um, that I don't know what they are, whatever, but I believe in them. I
Yeah.
think, yeah, I think there's many more things than us. I think, sometimes I think of myself, well, the more I know, the less I know. The older I get, the more there is to learn. And sometimes I feel, I don't know. But of course, also age brings wisdom and everything else. But
Yeah,
yes,
of course.
spirituality is a big thing with creativity, definitely. And I think it's like it enhances it.
Yeah. We're evolving, aren't we? So, it helps us on that journey. You touched on that before. We're just trying to master the journey of life, right? So it all helps.
Life
Women.
is tough, can I just say?
Yeah.
I mean, I like to be direct about it.
Yeah,
Life
yeah.
is tough.
It can be.
And the
Yeah.
more help you can have from yourself and
Yeah.
then others. So I learned at a very young age to just ask. So I'm very, very good at asking for help.
Okay. Yeah.
Because what I know is that people can either say yes or no.
Yeah.
But if you don't ask, you don't get.
Yeah.
So another thing I find people are not good at asking for help, but there is so much help out there. So one of my big passions is to do a Mapology guide on suicide prevention, but
Okay.
that would need to be sponsored because I'd like it to be free
Yeah,
everywhere.
sure.
But I always feel if people could just ask for help, there is tons and tons and tons of help out there, but people don't always know how to reach it.
Sure.
So I'm a little bit passionate about that.
Yeah, it's so true. I mean, and it's help can also equip you with the resources to be able to solve the same problem again in the future, right? So you're talking about, kind of enhancing your toolkit as you kind of seek help for the problem that's facing you in this current stage of life.
I talk about Mapology guides being a toolkit
Yeah.
for
Okay.
emotional well-being.
Yeah.
So, as you said, we have tools, and like any tool, if you use a hammer, you're not just going to use a hammer just for one thing. You can use a hammer for
Yeah.
multiple purposes. And as you say, once you've got a tool, you can adapt it
Yeah.
to so many things. And that's a creative way of living.
Yeah. Well, when you were talking earlier, I was actually thinking about how useful it potentially would be for a whole range of different, professionals in terms of in the mental health space, but or, more than that, schools, there's lots of places that I could see that this would be actually a really attractive resource for people because it's, so engaging and not boring and fun, like you said, right? So yeah, it's pretty cool.
I just had somebody who I met recently on a business trip, and I just gave her sort of a couple of maps, and she's a teacher, and she just sort of commented on Instagram saying, I used your maps in a class, and it was
Mm.
really, really helpful. And many teachers buy them, for that
Yeah,
reason. I
okay.
mean, yeah, they're meant to inspire in whichever way
Yeah,
people want to be inspired. There's no right or
yeah.
wrong here. It
That's a good
is,
word.
yeah.
That came up for me before, actually. I was thinking, actually, if nothing else, it potentially provides a little bit of creative inspiration, either visually or from, the journey of going through the map. So, yeah, it's pretty
And
inspiring
many
stuff.
people hang them as posters. And what they
Okay.
tell me is that, let's say you hang it in your living room and you pass it every day, some of the information will subconsciously enter you. Do you see what I
Yeah,
mean?
yeah, yeah. Well, that's
Because
the
you
that's
are,
the greater than ourselves thing again. We're talking
well,
spiritual now.
exactly. So if you just wanted, because you like the illustration or you like the
Yeah,
colors, which is
yeah,
great,
yeah.
something will rub off on you.
Yeah, well, it's
And
energy,
so for
right? There's
me,
energy. Energy has gone into creating the thing. It's sitting there with all that energy from all those people that have actually created it
absolutely.
and all the intention behind it. It's all infused in it. So of course it's going to rub off. It's amazing.
That's sort of one of my favorite thing when somebody first told me about it, because I knew that people hang them as posters,
Yeah,
but I didn't sort of put two and two together as one doesn't about one's own
yeah,
work, if you know what I mean. And then people started telling me and started, and it sort of rubbed off on me, and now I get this and I get that. So, it isn't like a book about reading from start to finish, but it is very much bite-size visual learning. That's
yeah,
that's what I like to call it. It's
yeah.
bite-size,
Nice.
and a lot of them you can use over and over and over again because you find something new. So, for instance, the expedition towards a meaningful life, if you do that at 18 when you've left college, or you do it as a 50-year-old, it'll just blow your mind how
Yeah.
different you think or different.
Mm.
So they can be reused, and that's something I like as well about it.
So good. So, for all the women out there then who are curious about more creative ways to navigate mindfulness, well-being, and personal development, what powerful message or question would you like to leave them with today?
A very good question. I think, I like to empower people. That's, I think, one of my biggest purposes is because I feel I've been empowered by my journey. So just be curious.
Mm,
Curiosity is very, very underrated. And I think it's one of the major things to stay young when we age,
mm,
not to get bored, but also to learn and
yeah,
to understand the world and
mm,
ourselves. I'm always curious. I speak to street sweepers because I'm curious about their lives or their job, or I'm just very, very curious. And I think that is a superpower,
Yeah.
to be curious.
Yeah, definitely.
And
And that feeds
yeah,
into creativity as well, right there, right? So you've
oh,
got
of course,
to the creative
it
journey is
all
a journey of curiosity. So so
absolutely.
cool.
And we change and evolve and learn. I learn something new every single day. I mean, how exciting is that?
Yeah, so cool.
That we can learn something every day. I'm never bored about anything because I'm just learning all the time. Or I read a
Yeah.
book and I reread a book and I see something I didn't see before. And I'm like, oh my God, that's amazing.
So cool. I'm a bit the same, so I can relate to that.
One
People,
more, there's
oh yeah.
one more caveat on this, which
Okay.
is, and stay playful, especially as
Okay.
we age.
Yes.
I think for
Yes.
me, and that's why the maps are a bit playful in many ways. I
Yes.
think there's too many people who are very, very serious and take life very seriously. And life is serious, don't get me wrong. I've said that before. But I do think we can find pockets of playfulness and stay playful.
Yes.
I think that's very important.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with that too.
Also in our journey of well-being and healing and all of
Yes.
that.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, part of what I advocate is part of, a creative practice, a physical creative practice that where you're making stuff. One of the elements of that is that you consistently, every time you show up for it, you've got to remind yourself, you've got to ask yourself, how am I going to play today? Like what is it that I'm going to do that's going to spark play? Because it's so important in terms of keeping everything feeling good, and everything feeling like it's, brand new. So, so cool.
And that, it also makes me keep hope for the future. I mean,
Yeah.
if we look at the news right now, I think everyone could honestly say there's no hope for humanity. But I do think there's hope, and we must
Mm.
never let go of that.
Yeah.
And, and I feel curiosity and hope and playfulness all feed into that, where
Yeah.
I also think it alleviates stress levels. I really mean that. I
Yeah.
think, if you are curious or playful or love what you do, for instance,
Hmm.
then you worry less about yourself or how you're feeling in that moment,
Hmm.
or you might have a little ache here and there, which we all have. So I sometimes have, aches on my knees, but I play tennis and I play pickleball, and then I feel better afterwards. It's all a bit strange, I know, but I think, staying playful
Mm.
in life and staying curious and never giving up hope, because I've learned that one day you can feel the worst you've ever felt in your life, and tomorrow something incredible happens. And
Yeah, that's it.
that's why I'm so passionate about suicide prevention, because sometimes it's just, well, it can be chemical, but it can be just a thought, isn't it?
Mm.
And then, but tomorrow everything could have changed,
Mm.
so anyway, sorry
Yeah.
if that's
Yeah.
getting too
Well, it's a
deep.
great conversation starter as well. I can see a map being really helpful to guide conversations about really difficult topics like that. So, um, yeah, it could be used in a group setting as well. It doesn't have to be just an individual absorbing the information. Be a great conversation starter to see kind of where different people end up on the map. Um, yeah, really powerful.
One day I want to do a game. Maybe I'll take one of the maps to
Okay.
make a game. I think that would be quite interesting. And I met a game designer, and actually, you've just reminded me that I need to
Yep.
follow up on that. But yes, I
Yep.
think it'll be lovely in a game. There are jigsaw puzzles out. There's an American
Okay.
company called Gallison. They took three of the maps and made them
Okay.
into 1,000-piece jigsaw puzzles. So that's another way of discovering, jigsaw puzzles traditionally are just visual, aren't they? Their lovely scene of
Yeah.
flowers or,
Yeah.
snow in New York or something like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
But of course, the maps have words and
Yeah.
different things. And so I think it's interesting. You're doing a puzzle, but then you're thinking, oh, who's Viktor Frankl, which is a statue, and
Yeah.
maybe you Google and you've learned something new.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So I thought that was really interesting that they picked that up.
I
Yeah.
like
And
that because you
everybody
actually
would.
probably would absorb more of the detail of it as well, right? Because you're
Yes.
trying to find the pieces and stuff. So
Exactly,
yeah.
exactly. I was very excited about that. And
Yeah.
yeah, so there's many applications, I think, but the main thing is to have some fun, to learn something about yourself that maybe you didn't know, to maybe have some more self-awareness, self-knowledge, and carry on with this beautiful life
Yeah.
we're living.
Yeah. So how can people get to know you better, Tina, and get a real feel for these maps and the wonderful work you're doing?
The maps, like anything online, they look good, but people ask me, why don't you do them PDF? Because I believe in print. I'm a graphic designer. I believe in
Mm.
learning through physical touch, smell. I think this online learning or whatever is great, but for illustration, I think you have to see the colors, you have to see everything. We are online. Obviously, we have a website.
Yep.
Uh, we have Instagram. There's Facebook, there's different shops, obviously there's subscription boxes, there's loads of various ways, but the easiest way for your listeners is probably the website. As you know, Australia, we ship worldwide, so it's not a problem to ship to Australia at all. And yeah, or follow us on Instagram or wherever, just to learn more about them.
Excellent. Well, I'll
And
put
feel
all,
free to ask me any questions. I'm always open for
yeah.
questions. My DMs are open. Sometimes people want some advice. We do offer bundles for certain
Mm-hmm.
groups of
Mm-hmm.
people,
Mm-hmm.
but we also have pick your own, and I find more people now buy the pick your own, which is really
Okay.
interesting because I used to think, okay, this is for, the frazzled or the doer.
Mm.
But I'm always open to people asking questions, who's this for and whatever, because it's not always that easy to know.
Yeah, absolutely. Great. Well, I'll put all the links in the show notes so they'll be available. But thank you so much for coming and chatting to me today, Tina. I loved our
Well, I had so much
conversation.
fun. I love
So
talking
good.
about creativity. I absolutely love talking about it because I think that's what makes the world go round.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
And thank you for being such a great host.
Oh, thanks. Hey, Sam here. Thanks so much for listening to the end. If you'd like to keep the conversation going, I would absolutely love to hear from you. Join my free soul-led creative community and gain access to free guides and resources, plus exclusive events and workshops, all from within the members area. This is your chance to connect with me and other like-minded souls. Please head to samhorton.co/community. Take care.